Hello, everybody. Good morning. So, before we get actually going, and even before we, introduce ourselves, I think it would be helpful just to kind of set the intent. What does the next 30 or so minutes look like? And as the panel name implies, blockchain has something to do with it, but not everything to do with it. And less about blockchain in terms of like from a technical standpoint, like this block goes after this block, and this is what that means, but more so what blockchain means, like the convergence of blockchain with other emerging technologies, and what that will mean for all types of organizations, like cities, municipalities, enterprises, startups, and ultimately citizens, as our social and market paradigms shift as these technologies unfold. And when we think about what the takeaway hopefully is, it's to kind of identify ways where cities can take a leading role, not just participating in this evolution, but leading it and re-architecting our innovation ecosystems to hopefully cultivate and nurture the best attributes of these technologies so we maximize its value versus another scenario where these technologies simply accelerate maybe consequences that technologies bring and ultimately lead to more social inequality and kind of make the challenges that we're experiencing in our cities even more challenging. So, and we're all contributors to that ecosystem, including my good friends here and fellow panelists. So why don't we just start off with just a quick few introductions here, and we'll just get going.
Excellent. Good morning, everybody. My name is Samson Williams. I'm Faris' emotional translator. He's going to tell you some technical things, then I'm going to explain them to you in plain English. So we're happy that you're here. I can't actually see anybody, so I assume there's folks in the audience. And so we're happy that you're here to learn about blockchain and its applications beyond blockchain itself.
My name's Elliot Chun. I am an ex-Wall Street capital markets guy that got fed up with the lack of impact that I was making in my career. And when you think about some of the challenges that we see in society and humanity, innovative technology can be a way in which we can solve for some of these things. And so I jumped full into this crazy world of blockchain, distributed ledger technology, and it's a wild ride. It's very exciting, but it also isn't the solution for everything, and it's still evolving. It's evolving in the industry, it's evolving in the people that are in it, and it's evolving in how the applications are now really starting to show that it can make an impact into cities and its citizens. And so we're really excited here to talk a little bit about these use cases. Our goal is to be not the smartest smart city panel. We don't want to be the dumbest smart city panel, but we want to try and be an entertaining smart city panel. So we hope you come along on this ride with us.
And I am Faris Oweis. Despite popular belief, that is me. I am Faris. A lot of people yesterday that I consider friends didn't recognize me, but this is an authentic version of myself. I'm an instigator at Instigation Protocol. So my team works with city-oriented blockchain startups in tandem with corporate innovation teams. So what we try to do is create new economy business models that put citizens as part of the value chain that these innovations are meant to create. So when they go out into market, by design, they're more distributive, and they foster a sense of value that citizens can actually feel, touch, and experience. And I think, actually, where is the clicker?
So Faris just said that humans are your customers, and he's designing things for humans.
Thank you, Samson. We're friends, don't worry.
Not after this panel.
Yeah. So just generally in life, I think it's a great way to kind of frame the narrative around the future is to kind of look at the past. And with that said, I think that we'll find that technology has always been a tool. How we choose to use the tool and the motivations behind it usually dictate the outcomes and what we achieve with it. And blockchain is no different. So if, like, for example, if you saw a knife and you saw a doctor with a knife, you would think that person is going to do good. If you saw a burglar with a knife, you would think that person is going to do bad. And it's no different than with technology. The motivations dictate the outcomes, just like our thoughts create our reality. And when I look at the evolution of cities, although all cities are unique and different and wonderful in their own way, I think some of the most successful smart city solutions have always shared a few common themes. Those that led those initiatives always had a sense of risk tolerance, political will, and kind of a unified mindset behind all the initiatives that they did, which brought cohesion to the whole strategy. And when the industry started out, you could say maybe in 2008, it was largely an academic exercise coming out of the UN around sustainable cities. Then ultimately, when the market crashed, a lot of multinationals were like, oof, we need to figure out other ways to make revenue. So what they did is they hired a bunch of lobbyists and a bunch of marketers to go to Congress and say, hey, we need to make sure that cities are very data oriented. We're going to have a data economy. And that essentially gave birth to this whole industry. And as it started out, we basically had a supplier-led smart city strategy, which meant you had companies no one's ever heard of selling sensors to companies you have heard of to then sell those sensors to cities with markup along the way. And what happened there is that it met the goal of measuring things. What it didn't meet, though, is the ability for those cities to understand what that data actually meant. So, for example, although many cities have it now, open data was born. So in London, for example, they had sensors everywhere, right? But the chief digital officer at the time said 95% of that data could not be understood. And people didn't trust it. There was a kind of an air of Big Brother going on around London. So they created open data with the sole intent of creating transparency. And there's good and bad that comes with that. So the good part is that created a whole new culture around a C-suite level within City Hall, where you found digital leadership, whether that be a chief digital officer, information officer, innovation officer, all come about. The other side of that, though, is that it was industry dictating the future and not really cities co-creating that future with the citizens and asking industry to participate. And there's a key difference there, and we'll come back to it, because as we shift into this new paradigm of a distributed economy, it'll be vital for cities to lead. And then another thing that came with open data, just a show of hands, who in this room understands open data? You go to an open data portal and you understand everything. Samson is a liar, but I'm accepting it's truthful. So
I'm just seeing if I can see who's raising their hands.
So about 10% of the crowd, because largely it's only technical, not only, but largely technical people are the only ones that interpret open data with ease at the very least. So given this, cities at the time were trying to figure out how to tap into their entrepreneurial capacity. And it turned out you had a lot of technical founders that were just living in these communities. And overnight, literally, there's companies that were born purely out of using open data, right? So like in London, sticking with London, you had City Mapper, which went from a $0 market cap to a $350 million market cap literally within a couple years. That is the good part. The challenging part about that, though, is, and open data, again, took political will, risk, and a mindset, right? Because no one else was doing it, just like any product, right? You have early adoption all the way to laggard. Someone's got to lead, then everyone else follows at a different stage. But the challenge, though, with the platform-led approach is that usually when we are measuring things with open data within cities, that means those challenges aren't really being adequately addressed on a state or federal level, and cities have to find a way with limited budget most of the time to address them themselves. And that holds true for the web. So as this platform-led approach was taking place in cities, the web was transforming. Its initial intent was to be a forum where information could be shared. But over time, certain market players became dominant within their verticals. That could be Google with search, or Uber with mobility, you name it, or Amazon with marketplace. And that began to create an inequitable relationship with cities, where we found some cities being more progressive and other cities being more, for lack of a better word, subservient. So the difference is, again, political will, tolerance for risk, and the mindset. So in Europe, for example, with Uber's not allowed to operate in many European cities. They have digital rights literally built into their DNA. Nordics have sustainability built into their DNA. Barcelona has collaboration built into their DNA. Amsterdam has co-creation built into their DNA, and that manifests into policy. So that is a mindset. And then you have GDPR, which grows from that, right? But GDPR is not only what the political will is, it's the actual act of enforcing it. So cities simply say, like, you're not complying with us. Uber, you need to share your data. If not, you got to go home. Conversely, in the US, when you have like a city like Denver, for example, it's the complete opposite. So you have Uber that's embedding public transport into the Uber app, and that's called the walled garden. That's when you have an end-to-end tech solution within another end-to-end tech solution. And you basically have to depend on the solution that you're working with to be essentially very collaborative with where they direct people. And if we know anything about Uber, they have one goal. It's to increase shareholder price and simply take as many humans as you can to train machines to eventually replace them. So when you have, like, literally, you have Uber drivers today that are online logging into their email. Who knows, like, when you click to, like, where the stop signs are and make sure you're not a robot. You know that what I'm talking about before when you log in? That's you training an autonomous vehicle. So imagine you're a Uber driver and you're logging into your email and you're literally training your replacement. This is the problem we have here. We have an inequitable system. So now we have a chance. So blockchain presents an opportunity, great opportunity. We have entrepreneurs like I'm on stage with right now. We have yourselves. And in this distributed future, the real call to action here is again for cities to lead in the building of it, build the architecture, but not in a way that you think. It's not upgrading an existing system. It's literally creating a new system with new values that are more relevant to who we are today.
Let me summarize that for everyone. Trust is the only business you're in. Uh, and so if your community doesn't trust you, innovation doesn't happen. All politics is local. Continue.
And I'll hand it off with this. So I'm a huge believer. So when you go to some of these blockchain conferences, right, there's some people that are far out there. There will no longer be any formal government governance. You know, blockchain will take over. I had a talk with, I met the mayor of Honolulu yesterday. Kirk, I believe is his name. Very inspiring dude. And it made me realize that somehow, some way, people like that belong in our communities. It's special. No one else besides those particular individuals have the empathy and knowledge, not just of their people, but the cultural nuances that multi-generational cultural nuances that are behind them, right? And that's something a large tech platform or whatever just simply can't have, even as much as they want to talk about inclusion. They just can't replicate it. So my friends here are going to talk to you through about what today looks like and what the future will hold and how we can basically adapt to it and lead within it.
I'll let you take it away.
Yeah, and we can talk a little bit about today and the future is what Faris was talking about, but we like to more talk about use cases. How are these technologies being applied today in cities today to, I don't know if it solves problems, but it's starting to make a difference. And it's starting to make a difference in all sizes of cities, not just your large cities like Atlanta, but also your small communities that have less than 50,000 people, or in some situations, very developing parts of the world. Really, really small use cases just to be able to test how we think the technology can actually make a difference. Samson had mentioned trust, and trust is probably one of the biggest hurdles between cities and its citizens. And so how can we improve or repair or build a brand new trust bond between cities and its citizens? Blockchain can be a tool to help do that. As we think about the Hitachi presentation before was talking about really large scale stuff and really small scale stuff. If we think about the most simple examples around transparency, things like school attendance, real basic. In emerging places in the world, school attendance is actually very, very difficult to track. And it's a very, very big issue as it relates to education. People just not showing up and students going to places they shouldn't be going. When you are able to properly track something like school attendance and make that information transparent and available to everybody in the community, it starts to change behaviors and it starts to change a culture. And that culture becomes one of accountability as a student. Hey, I'm actually going to attend, and you can see it on a ledger that I'm attending. My parents can see it, the school can see it, my peers can see it. And then you can add incentivizations around that. So growing up, we got gold stars for attending classes. Well, you can build incentivizations with the city in order to incentivize those to actually attend class. And it's a very, very small use case, but one that we're seeing being applied in a lot of developing areas of the world, and it's starting to make a difference. Another one is around transparency of funds. So cities are funded by taxes paid by the taxpayers. There is a distrust between taxpayers and those that are expending the taxes and the funds, particularly around capital projects and how that money is being deployed and who is being deployed to. Are we going to a situation where Why doesn't the taxpayer see every line item that's happening in a capital project? They invested the money, they paid their taxes, they've done their part. Should there be a similar trust back by the people that are expending those resources to be able to show how the capital is being allocated, to whom and to when? And oh, by the way, when things aren't going right, have some sort of mechanism where you can say, okay, let's stop and let's address this. Let's kind of reevaluate, let's adjust, and then let's go on and improve. We're seeing those types of use cases being used as well. And it's scary. It's scary for the people that are running cities. It's scary for the people that are running the projects. It's scary for the contractors that are in the projects. But are we going forward more towards that direction or more towards a direction of opaque and non-transparency? Our view is that we think we're going more towards that transparent route and that ability to be able to see and track what is happening as a citizen in a capital project that's actually happening, and that the citizens' taxpayer dollars are being funded. Those are going to be some really, really interesting components that we're seeing today. I think Samson's going to talk a little bit more about that. But when you think about the technology, it's really around transparency and rebuilding that trust connection, city leaders to citizens.
All right, so I guess I'm up next, but I will actually let's just skip it and I'll go back to Soul.
Oh no, I was gonna translate for Elliot here. He's talking about accountability, and I love that point because Faris here, he's saying that trust is the only business we're in. All government is local. If your citizenry doesn't trust you, your community doesn't trust you, nothing happens. I'm gonna move because this light is blinding me. So if your community doesn't trust you, innovation doesn't happen because they don't buy into your mission, vision, or values. So keep that in mind. All business, all politics is local. This is why we're talking about smart cities and not smart government or smart federal. So it's up to you guys to develop that trust within your community to actually lead and innovate. And what Elliot was talking about with transparency, it's actually accountability. Because if you have insights into how your government is spending money, into how many kids are attending school, which dictates funding, you have accountability. And I love transparency because now I can hold you accountable for the decisions that you're making. And that's where blockchain is a little weird and a little awesome all at the same time. I know we jumped right into blockchain. I just want to take a step back and explain it to you in a very simple format so when we talk about resilience and these other things, you understand. By show of hands, has anyone ever been in a group text message? Yes? Excellent. I love it. We are all now part of this group text message. And Samson is going to send, I have $100 in this group text message. It's highly complicated stuff. I send Faris $10. Faris sends Elliot 5. How much money do I have left? $90. I can't say I have 100. I can't say I have 1,000. Why? Because you all can see I had 90, and I sent him 10, and he sent Elliot 5. Faris can't go back and say now he has $10,000, right? We all know he has 5. Because we're all in this group text message. We can scroll up, we can scroll down, and we can see the data that was exchanged. It is literally a distributed, encrypted ledger of records. Ta-da! Blockchain is like a group text message. Now that we've demystified that, now you need to think, does our government need something where everyone, in the blockchain world, you guys would be called nodes, not cell phones. Does everyone need to see this record of transactions? Yes or no? Where I can't go back and change it. There's a young lady here from VoteEase is talking about voting. Does everyone need to be able to scroll up and down and see who voted for whom? It's a really good question. But that also brings a level of transparency, that brings a level of accountability. And in that example of that group text message of me sending cash via text message, what didn't happen, there is no bank. I'm literally transferring value without a middleman. And that's where blockchain becomes the realm of drug dealers, money launderers, and sex traffickers. Because if banks can't charge fees, how do they make money? But there's so many other applications of blockchain beyond the cryptocurrencies. And so I'm going to give you very briefly about resiliency in Dubai. Because when we talk about smart cities, they built a city in the desert. They're like, hey, here's a desert. We should build a city here. And so it was like, oh, that's great. And so when you're building cities in the desert, I live in Baltimore from time to time. Why can't we have that same thing, that same mentality in Baltimore? Why can't we have that same mentality in the Rust Belt? because they literally built a city in the desert. And so they're using blockchain for digital identities because once I know that I am Samson, I can tack on everything else: voter registration, DMV, anything the government requires you to have an ID to do, which is everything. I can tack on those services to your blockchain based digital identity. And where this really helps with resiliency, I'm going to give you this example of recycling because we don't often think of what does recycling have to do with resiliency. We're always focused on hurricanes, natural disasters, and things of that nature. When people don't pick up your garbage, everything stops. Your city's not going to be very resilient. And so when we talk about resiliency and garbage, we're really having a conversation about recycling. No one really loves recycling. I love recycling because water companies don't produce water. They produce plastic bottles that they put water in. What are they doing for recycling? How is that impacting your city's health? And so when you have blockchain, going back to that group text message, I've got this plastic bottle. It was manufactured by Coca-Cola. It goes through its life cycle, and then where does it end up at? So with blockchain, you can actually track that plastic bottle from cradle to grave to see that it was actually recycled. This is not a very sexy topic because it's a really boring use case for blockchain, but you'll see that as we have more humans, we will produce more garbage and more refuge, and we will literally be drowning in plastic. Right now, plastics are killing our ocean, and when our ocean dies, so do we. So this is where we're talking about resiliency, not only in Dubai, but globally, because they're focused on how do you track plastic waste on a blockchain to actually have that transparency and accountability that it was recycled. So that's what I'm very excited about. Anything you want to add?
No, I think that, I mean, only Samson can make a very boring type of topic slightly exciting. So I'm sure we're all appreciative of it. Oh, I'm actually going back. So economic development, I would say, is a bit more of an exciting topic than recycling. Um, in Seoul, I'm particularly fascinated with Seoul. Actually, as much as I love Seoul, it's actually the hardest city for me to go to. It's the least vegan friendly city in the world. So I actually struggle quite a bit there. But I can appreciate what they're doing. And I'm just going to come out and say the two rebuttals people always tell me when I say Seoul is really doing a lot of great things with blockchain. Number one, they always say that, oh, they have tons of money, they can fund everything. Well, yeah, because they do that for a reason, because they actually tax their major conglomerates, whereas the tax of our major conglomerates basically gets stuck in Dublin. So their taxes actually feed public works, so public policymakers can actually breathe. Another thing is they always have a long-term vision. It's not about how much productivity that you can have within an election cycle or within a finite amount of time. Not just Korea, but Japan, China. It's like 100-year plans, 50-year plans. They actually view it as something they have to pass off to another generation. It's very visceral for them. So when you compare that with like kind of what seems at least today is a 24-hour news cycle, you can only imagine how that creates different motivations and different behaviors as you're rolling out various initiatives. In Korea specifically, it's actually very coordinated, right? So in Korea, it's actually viewed as a form of national security. So it's literally in a regulatory framework that's tied to the country's national security. So what that means is that everyone's aligned, right? So that type of regulation and that type of policy cascades down to a city level where all stakeholders can be aligned and incentivized, right? So what that looks like in the city of Seoul is a public-private partnership, which I feel will be very prominent in the future. It's an $88 million fund, 12 million provided by the city, the remainder provided by the private sector. So a notable example being Samsung, who's also very blockchain forward, but we don't have time to get into that today. Where those funds actually go is quite unique. A lot of it is in education. So 55 million is towards 2 blockchain centers that's designed to host 200 blockchain companies, train 750 experts in multiple generations to literally create the workforce of tomorrow. To Samson's point about resiliency, be more resilient for that future with your talent. And then in turn, with those companies, instead of subsidizing companies to come, have people want to come work for those companies and have it organically grow. Another thing they're doing, they have like 14 projects, so I'll just maybe cover one or two. They're coming out with a cryptocurrency, which is basically code for we're creating programmable money, right? That's all it is. They're creating incentives around it, and they're basically trying to track it from beginning to end. And they're doing this around things like public transport. So for example, if you're trying to go from the Gangnam district into another district, but the subway is totally packed, they'll incentivize you through your mobile application to just wait and use a crypto with maybe a local merchant or something like that. They're also using it with mobile voting and things like surveys. The idea being those cities are tired of trying to understand what their citizens want through Twitter. Citizens have their own voice, and it should be a direct dialogue with your public policymakers that care about you more than a company that does not care about you, but simply has a fiduciary duty to care more about shareholder value than they do. That's the difference. I would say another interesting thing with the time that we have left is specifically what they're doing around not just IoT, but actually I'm going to cut it off 4 minutes. I want to get into innovation ecosystems. Is that all right with you?
Let me
Yeah,
summarize
let's do it.
that. Can I summarize that right quick?
Go.
Smart cities require funding, which requires political will.
Exactly, Samson. Thank you so much.
And so we've heard about some of these use cases, and we've seen some of the potential that that blockchain can bring. How do you bring that back to your cities? How do you bring that back into helping your city begin? Where do you start? Right now, we're in an awareness phase, and we're moving into the next phase, which is education. This stuff is hard. This stuff is very challenging to comprehend. It's intimidating. Samson did a great job talking about group text message, but we're just scratching the surface. Cities, and Faris had mentioned it in Seoul, they're providing innovation centers to act as physical destinations to go to learn about not just blockchain, but other innovative technologies like data science and AI and IoT. These are places that cities have the real estate to be able to implement places like this, and they should be doing it. Think public libraries. Think about areas in malls or retail places. These should all be reimagined to areas in which cities are taking a leadership role in reskilling their citizens. Learning isn't now just about being in school and being a student. It's now transitioned to a lifelong effort. Everyone in here should constantly be learning. The velocity of innovation is happening so quickly that today, even me, I've been in this space for a year and a half, and I'm learning new things about innovative tech every day, every minute. We should all be taking that aspect of lifelong learning. And at lifelong learning, where you go to actually access this type of curriculum and access this type of education, cities can provide these innovation centers where you can take people and have curriculums and educations, community building, events. We do it a lot in New York City. There's blockchain events almost every night. Citizens want this type of physical connections. They want the ability to see how the technology is being used, be able to talk with people like us here and talk with other people that are also neophytes and learning about how these new technologies can be learned. Oh, and by the way, it is now enabling passion projects for people. Everyone in this room probably has a passion, and with new technology today, has an opportunity to actually take that passion and do something with it. Take that passion and actually make that happen. Where do you start? You start at an innovation center that your city is leading the charge in helping and supporting.
And to simplify that even further, I bet this could be handled with one call. The vendors that cities currently work with, it may not be the people that cities are working with today, they all have innovation arms that are in a lab doing all sorts of crazy stuff, trying to figure out how to monetize in the future. And they're all basically picking dance partners with other major enterprises to do it with. So there's absolutely no reason, with all the physical space, as Elliot mentioned, that cities have, with the relationships they already have with industry, that they can't demand to be included in the production and the learning that goes along with elevating those business models and curating them to make sure they ensure the result in a human value, not just the monetization. So I think that's also key. It's literally within arm's reach.
So I'll wrap it up in this last 40 seconds. You can't be smart if you're not educated. Ta-da. So if you need to invest in educating your citizenry, it's really not that complicated. Otherwise, your city's not smart. It just has really cool gadgets that no one knows how to build, operate, or maintain. So just remember that. If you want to have a smart city, you got to invest in education within your citizenry itself. And it doesn't matter if it's not blockchain. Blockchain is just this chapter of digital transformation. There are more disruptive technologies coming down the pipeline. I'm a big fan of, not a big fan, but we talked a little bit about big data, AI, and this thing called neural net learning our voice. It's going to be even more disruptive to your communities and your citizenry than blockchain is. So remember, can't be smart without education. Invest in education.
thank you for everyone's time.
Thank you.